Hi everyone, it's Plasticep coming in from Melbourne, Australia. Let me tell you, it's a very good morning to everyone out there in the world. And I've got the rock and roll detective coming in from the USA. How are you today, Jim Berkenstadt?
How you doing, Plastic EP? It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you and it's great to talk to you. And you've got fantastic worldwide exclusive news for everyone out there. Go and tell them all about it.
That's right. Well, I've updated my book, The Beatle Who Vanished. It's now called The Beatle Who Vanished 60th Beatles Anniversary Tour. And the information is, I wanted to reveal, is that after almost 20 years of research and investigation, I have found Jimmie Nicol.
That
Now,
is amazing news. And let me tell you, the world's been looking for Jimmie Nicol, and it's really great that you found him. So tell us the story behind that to everyone watching, all the new Beatle fans as well.
So you want the story about how like the investigation, that sort of thing?
Yeah, just tell us how you found Jimmy and how he is.
Okay. Well, it was interesting because I just didn't know he'd lived in so many countries. So I thought, well, where do you start looking for someone that doesn't want to be found? And my brother said to me, well, in any mystery, if you can find the woman, she might lead you to the man. And so that stuck in my head. And I thought maybe I didn't realize that, but he had a point. So I went back to some of my old interviews. One was with the cousin of Jimmie Nicol and his oldest friend. They were born within a month of each other, Ronnie Nicol, who lives in Edinburgh. And Ronnie, I looked at that interview, and Ronnie mentioned one day I called to talk to Jimmy in London, and a woman answered the phone, and she said her name was Josephina. So I'm like, all right, maybe this is the woman that'll help lead me somewhere. Then, when I was updating the book, I wanted to do a story about a teenage band that Jimmy had when they were just little kids. They started their own band. Of course, Jimmy was the drummer, and one of the kids named, I think, John Rogers, and his brother's name was Roy Rogers, who here in America, Roy Rogers was a famous cowboy on TV. But John said, I remember something about a Josephina, and I hadn't really put all these pieces together, and I hadn't heard from my brother's advice, until recently. And he said, look for the woman. So her name came up again. Then I was doing an interview with let's see, I was doing an interview with these Mexican rock and roll historians, and they said we gave a gold medal award ceremony in Mexico to honor like 50 years of rock and rollers in Mexico, and of course we wanted to include Jimmy, but we all, of course, knew Jimmy was dead. So the poster says gold medal to be posthumously awarded to Jimmie Nicol. So I said to them, well, how did you know he was definitely dead? And they said, well, no one here, none of his friends, family, his ex-wife, Julia, no one had heard from him in really about 30 years or so. So we checked Google, we looked all over, and there was just no sign of him. So we put on the poster that he was dead, but he said that was because we have a lot of young people and we want to teach them about history. So we wanted him on the poster because he was probably the most famous of people to play rock and roll in Mexico. I said, all right, that's cool. So, I kept asking him questions about the event, the ceremony. Julia Villaseñor, who was Jimmy's second wife and married her in Mexico, she was at the event. So I talked to her, and but after a while, I went back to the historian and I said to him, anything strange, like about, say, someone who was there who you didn't recognize? And he said, no, we knew everybody who was there. It wasn't a big crowd. He said it's not like the Grammy Awards. It was just like a restaurant, and maybe 30 of us, we all know each other for years. But he said the strange thing is I got a phone call about a day after the gold medal award, and it was from a woman named Josephina. I'm like, oh my gosh. there's something about this Josephina. So I said, well, what did she say? And he said, she said, can I come and pick up Jimmie's gold medal? And he didn't know her from left field. And so he said, no, I gave it to Julia, who was Jimmie's ex-wife here in Mexico. And then she just hung up. She didn't say another word. She just hung up. So I thought, that's interesting. Maybe Jimmie is around, and maybe she wanted to get that medal for him, and he maybe knew about this event but didn't want to, show up because he wants people to think he's dead. He told his son Howie Nicol in the 90s, if anybody asks about me, tell them I'm dead. And that started a whole thing about Jimmie Nicol being dead back then. And he was asked by Paul McCartney if Jimmie could be involved in the anthology, and he said he didn't say the dead lie. He just said no, he's not around, or something like that. And in fact, later on, Apple contacted me because they knew I had written this book, and when they were working on the live documentary, I think it was called 8 Days a Week, of them touring and everything, they said, hey, can you find Jimmie Nicol for us? And I said, I still haven't found him. So it's been a long, hard road. I'll leave the rest of the details about Jimmie and how I got to locate where he is and what he's doing and how he's doing. I'll leave that to the readers.
Now, that's fantastic. And also, I want to say the book now, I like the new title of the book, and it's been expanded. And I mean, how do you beat a book like that now? That took you nearly 8 years to put that all together. Is that right, Jim?
That is right. And along the way, there were some very interesting things that happened. I don't know if you have a specific question, but I wanted to share some funny things that happened. I started getting emails from people out of the blue around the world. And here's a story that I found interesting. I got an email from a musician who said that he would play a lot of weddings in the state of New York in the United States. And he said, I once played this Scottish wedding, and all of us had to wear kilts while we were playing the music. And he said, I'm pretty sure that Jimmie Nicol was in the band. And I said, why are you so sure? And he goes, well, I think he told me he played with the Beatles. And I said, I see. And I said, what song do you remember playing with Jimmie? And he said, it was the disco song, I Will Survive. I said, well, he didn't really do disco. But I said, well, do you have any photos? Do you have any other people who witnessed this? Do you know when it happened? So he said, well, it happened in 1985, and he came over, and he was there a long time. So I called Jimmie's cousin, Ronnie Nicol, and said, Ronnie, do you remember Jimmie going off to New York just to play a wedding, a Scottish wedding? And he said, that never happened. and then another thing that popped up was someone from Indiana, the state of Indiana, sent me a poster, and it said, the Jimmie Nicol Band will be appearing at this club. And it was a very tiny little club. So I saw the poster, and the funny thing about the poster was it was a picture of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan with Ringo Starr. So I thought, why is this the Jimmie Nicol Band and he's not even in the poster? So I called up that club and said, I saw this poster. I saw you're going to have this band there. And he started laughing. He goes, no, it's not Jimmie Nicol. It's just a bunch of guys that like to play Beatle cover songs, but they thought Jimmie Nicol was such a cool part of the Beatles story, they named their band after him.
That's amazing, because we've got to give credit where credit's due. I mean, to be with the Beatles on the first world tour, right? Jimmie Nicol should come out to every Beatle conference and meet the fans, because I can tell you, the Beatle fans out there all over the world love Jimmie Nicol for what he did. He's in Beatle history forever. He's in your
Right.
fantastic book, The Beatle That Vanished, which that is the Bible of Jimmie Nicol as far as I'm concerned. There's no greater book, and it's going to become a film. But I'm saying
right.
Jimmie Nicol should come out and be embraced by every Beatle fan all over the world, because I can tell you this, Jimmy, this is a personal message from Plastic EP to you. Beatle fans love you, and they will embrace you, and they will thank you for being the only person that went on the first Beatles tour all over the world. And the fact that I'm in Melbourne, Australia, means more to me than ever, because, as I said, you went on tour with them. Ringo came to Melbourne and played at Festival Hall. And there you are at Essendon Airport before the new airport was built. And Jim, tell us about him leaving and Brian Epstein giving him a gold watch.
Right. Well, that was really interesting because Brian was upset with Jimmie the day before when all five Beatles were at the press conference table, because they were very focused on asking questions of Ringo, obviously, because he had just come back to rejoin the band. And the other band members were all huddled around. They were really happy to see him. And Jimmie was just sort of way off on the side of the table, and no one cared about asking him questions anymore. But there was one reporter sort of kneeling down next to him who started asking him, like, what are you going to do when you get back to London? And Jimmie's mic was on, so he was talking, and that meant that he was talking over the other Beatles and Ringo at the same time. So Brian Epstein blew up because, that he considered that inconsiderate and, not appropriate. So when the press conference broke up, he said to Jimmie, that was terrible. You shouldn't have done that. And I want you to go straight to your room and pack up because you're finished. And the reason I know all that is because the drummer for Sounds Incorporated, I interviewed him, and he was right there standing next to Brian when this all took place. And so Jimmie went to his room and packed, but he did not just stay in his room and wait till the next day. He then did another naughty thing. He went out to a pub and, was having drinks. And when Epstein found out that he had left the hotel and was outside of their control, he blew up again, and he sent Neil and Mal to go get him. And when they found him finally in a nearby pub, he said, "What's the big deal? I'm not a Beatle anymore." And Neil Aspinall said, "You are a Beatle until we put you on that airplane." So the next day, they had to play nice because both Brian and Jimmie were being interviewed by a television news reporter, and about Jimmie's experience and what he was going to do next and all of that. And also Jimmie had wanted to go back to Sydney, and Brian said, "No, you have a one-way ticket to London, and that's it. You're not going back to Sydney." So, a lot of sort of grumbling between those two. And then after, they all both pretended to be buddies on this last interview, TV interview, and then Brian gave him the famous gold watch. So this is the gold watch that Brian Epstein and the Beatles gave to Jimmie Nicol. And you can see it says, "To Jimmie, with appreciation and gratitude from the Beatles and Brian Epstein, June of 1964. And this was given to him at that last interview, and then he was put on the plane by Brian. And what's interesting about the watch is that as I interviewed people after his Beatles tour, he was always showing it off as sort of a badge of credibility, like, I was a Beatle and I did a good job of saving them, and they chose me because I'm a great drummer. And it was sort of his entree, especially, I was told, when he got to Mexico. Many of the musicians said one of the first things he did was pull out the watch or have it and undo it, because this is the back of the watch you're looking at, and show that to them. And that was a very impressive thing, because this is a very iconic item to have gotten from the Beatles. And I think it was very nice of Brian to prepare that back in London before he and Ringo came to Melbourne, to reunite. And over time, he started to have issues where things didn't work out as successfully as he wanted them to. And so when he was married to Julia in Mexico, which was really only a year, although they worked together beforehand, then they got married and they worked together. And even after their divorce, 1 year later, they continued to do a lot of artistic musical work together, and they were on television there. But one day she told me he was very frustrated with the way things were going, and he talked about how he thought Brian Epstein had blacklisted him. I talked to people in the inner circle, including Tony Bramwell and Neil Aspinall before he died, and everyone said no. Brian, first of all, never blacklisted anyone, they said, and secondly, that little argument they had, knowing Brian, he probably forgot that within a couple hours. And that he said Brian, the Beatles, and everyone in the organization really appreciated what Jimmie did to save the Beatles' first world tour. And also the fact that he fit in so well as a drummer, socially he fit in. So no one seems to believe the blacklisting, but in his mind, Jimmie thought Jimmie had a friend. He was in a band with Vince Eager in the early 60s. And Vince Eager, when Jimmie was in that band, actually was blacklisted by Larry Parnes, his manager. So I think Jimmie got that idea in his head. When things didn't go well, he could blame it on Brian. So Julia said one day he got so upset, and he had like a top dresser drawer open. He took the watch off and he smashed it into the drawer. And she said it broke into a zillion pieces. And she looked at it and said, there's no way to put this watch back together. But Jimmie did keep the back of the watch.
Now, Jim, I'd like you to tell everyone about your fantastic books, The Beatle That Vanished, and your other big seller as well. Tell them about the two books.
Well, The Beatle Who Vanished, we've been talking about. It's the updated version. It's the updated version, you can tell, has a little red circle on it, which says the 60th Beatles Anniversary Tour version. And that's, of course, about Jimmie Nicol, who had a very interesting career both before and after the Beatles. And now you'll get to know everything that he ever did. In fact, I got a note from his cousin and I put it on the back of the new book. It says, and this is from Ronnie Nicol in Edinburgh, his first cousin and oldest friend in the world. Jim Berkenstadt has nailed it with this story of Jimmie and his life's accomplishments. It is great to see the detective work continue, and that Jimmie has been found. And then he said, "We love you, Jimmie, wherever you are." Now, here's the other book. It's called Mysteries in the Music, Case Closed. And it's 8 different mysteries. All are famous. Here are a couple. One is, did the Beach Boys steal a song from Charles Manson, the murderer? Another one is, did the CIA in the U.S. Attempt to assassinate Bob Marley? And there are many more really cool stories that have been floating around the internet, but I got to the people who are alive and solved these mysteries.
I got to thank you so much, Jim, for coming on the show and giving us that worldwide exclusive. And I just want to say again, Jimmie Nicol, all the Beatle fans and music fans out in the world, love you. And you know what I love about this? When Paul said to Ringo, come back as Jimmie's wearing your suits out, Jimmie Nicol wore Ringo's suits were a bit short. The jacket was all right, but the shorts were a bit short.
It looked a little tight to me because Jimmie was sort of a husky guy and Ringo was more thin. So it looked like they couldn't let it out enough, for his bigger, he's a muscular guy.
Well, I'm glad you said the word husky, because that was his single. Husky, you can go on YouTube and see it.
Yeah, you can see it, hear it. Yeah. Well, this has been a real pleasure for me, Plasticep. I love being on your show, and I love watching your other interviews with other guests too. You're the best at what you do.
Thank you so much, Jim. And as I said, as an award-winning author, as a rock and roll detective, and as a person that's worked for Apple, I congratulate you on all your catalogue of work that you do, even sourcing and books about rare Beatle records. As I said, you are a legend, and everyone out there, new Beatle fans, make sure that you look up Jim Berkenstadt and get his books, because the guy is just fantastic.
Thank you so much. If you want, you can find the books at Amazon around the world. Just type in the book or my name. And also, if you want to know more about my past career as a rock and roll detective, you can go to which is AND, roll detective.